Hello, Blanche and Baby Jane and all the ships at sea, and welcome to A Very Good Year, the movie podcast where we invite a guest to pick their favorite year of movies and talk to us all about that year. I'm your host, Jason Bailey, and across the mic and across the country from me is my co-host,
Michael Hull.
And today is a first because we've got not one, but two wonderful guests on the pod to talk to us about their favorite movie year. Our first guest is a past president of the Los Angeles Film Critics Association, and he teaches film criticism at UCLA. His byline has appeared at the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Hollywood Reporter, and many more. And he's also the author of several wonderful books, including Outrageous Conduct, Art, Ego, and the Twilight Zone Case, and Hollywood on the Couch. Folks, one of the greats, Stephen Farber. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, good to be with you.
Thank you so much for doing this. And our second guest is a film commentator, historian, and author. He's the former senior vice president and head film buyer for Landmark Theaters, a former member of the Board of Appeals for the Classification and Ratings Administration of the MPA. And with Stephen, he presents a series of classic film screenings on their anniversaries at the Laemmle Theaters in Los Angeles. Please join me in saying hello to Michael McClellan. Hello, Michael.
And hello there, and I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you for coming on, you guys. And the reason, this is not random, the reason we've invited both of these gentlemen on the show at the same time is that they are the co-authors of the book, Cinema 62, The Greatest Year at the Movies, which, as you can guess, is a perfect book for discussion on this show. So first, I guess I want to thank you guys, because usually when we have authors come on, we plug their book, we spend a few minutes promoting that, and then I have to kind of awkwardly pivot to asking, what year did you choose and why? But with your book, we don't have to do that because the book answers that question itself. So for those who haven't read it, though, why is 1962 the greatest year at the movies?
It was a sort of a pivotal year, I think, for both of us in our growing up. We actually were alive in 1962. I know some of your guests talk about a year before they were born, which is fine too. But I was actually a freshman in college in 1962, so I'm dating myself, but there you are. People can find out anyway. So I had always been like a movie buff when I was growing up. Loved going to the movies and loved all different kinds of movies. But that year of 1962, it was sort of part of my burgeoning college education. I really saw so many outstanding films, and they all made a huge impression on me. And at that point, I wasn't thinking about writing a book. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, but the movies had stayed with me all that time. And when Michael and I met, 40 years later, we discovered that not only, I was a film critic, he was a theater exhibitor. So obviously we'd both seen a lot of movies, but in a conversation, we discovered that both of us looked on 1962 as a high point in the whole history of cinema. And I think Mike had seen some of them in 62 when they came out, and some of them you saw later. I didn't see them all in 62 either. I think some of the movies I saw afterwards, and some of them I appreciated more in subsequent years. But it just seemed like it was a great a range of many different kinds of movies that were being done and that were very successful. It was sort of the heart of the foreign film explosion in this country, and we'll get to that a little more in talking about one of the specific foreign films that had a huge impact. And those movies were very stimulating, but the American movies, the Hollywood movies, were also very exciting. They range, a lot of them were serious dramas, there were Westerns, there were thrillers, there were comedies. It sort of touched every base, but high quality in every field of film, I think.
Michael, do you think there was anything that was sort of happening in the industry at that moment that was of particular significance in terms of creating so many high quality pictures around this time?
Yeah, I mean, basically, from year to year to year, you're on a sort of a crap roll, because like a roll of the dice, because
Yes.
1963 the quality went way down, and then it rolled in from that. In 61, that was a halfway decent year, but nothing
Yeah, there
like
were some good movies
yeah,
in
yeah.
61.
Yeah, so the early 60s were a real transitional point in Hollywood, because the studio system had been in decline since the 50s.
Right.
A lot of actors and producers and directors went independent in the 50s, and they formed their own production companies, and they were having their films released through the major studios. So it was a real collection of in-house, and the studios had been shedding their in-house writers and their craftspeople, and so that's what was going on. And as Stephen alluded to, there was this very fertile international global film cinema phenomenon going on. And that was reflected in the art houses, in the American art houses of the period, which were flourishing because they were
Right.
playing all of those films. And those films were popular because they dealt with basically adult themes and adult material. And for the more visceral folks, there was a lot of semi-nudity and sexuality that you would never see in an American movie. So
Right.
it was a combination of that, of the rise of the independent production, the decline of the Hollywood system, and they were also, in the studio, they were willing to take more chances because they had to compete with the international influx coming into the country, and also to satisfy their the actors, and because the contract system was still in place. It was in serious decline, but it was still there. Marilyn Monroe, example, was still under contract at 20th Century Fox in 1962, the year that she passed away.
That totally makes sense. No, okay, so now you sort of set the scene for us in terms of what's happening in Hollywood going into 1962. Before we get into some of these specific movies that you've picked out for us, Mike is going to fill us in on what was happening outside of Hollywood in that year. So let's hear some headlines.
January 9, 1962, Cuba and the Soviet Union signed a trade pact.
Okay.
February 3, 1962, we put an embargo on Cuba that went into effect on February 7th, so not quite a month later. And you haven't been able to get a decent cigar in this godforsaken country ever since.
True. Yes.
In 1957, convicted Russian spy Rudolf Abel was sentenced to 30 years, escaping the death penalty after his attorney argued that the United States might want to swap Abel for an American at some future time. Now, Abel has been exchanged for U-2 pilot Gary Powers. Powers was sentenced by Russia to 10 years in 1960, and only weeks ago wrote his family that he had little hope of an early release. But negotiations between the two governments bore fruit. Since his release, Powers was not immediately available for photographs.
February 10, captured CIA agent Francis Gary Powers was exchanged for Soviet spy Rudolf Abel in Berlin.
That's a movie. I've seen that movie. That's Bridge of Spies. Steven Spielberg. Good picture.
Yes, it is. And they told us that he was just like, he was just flying his balloon, bro.
It was just
a weather balloon.
Out
but
for
no,
a
he
pleasure
was
flight. Yeah.
He was definitely a CIA agent. Also in January, the Ranger 3 rocket was supposed to crash into the moon, and the idea was that it would send images back to the United States, back to NASA for the last 10 minutes before it crashed into the moon and presumably would basically be destroyed, assuming it's not made out of cheese. So that failed by 22,000 miles in January.
Missed it by that much.
Yeah, by that much. I mean, relative to the universe, that much.
Okay, fair.
But then in April, the Ranger 4 nailed it.
All right, great.
Can I get a USA?
Yeah, USA. USA. Yay, science. Yay, science. Getting it done in the 60s.
I mean, you want to at least send a not very good camera into it before you try to send peoples.
Fair.
Make sure you're not going to miss by 22,000 miles when the peoples are on. In June, the Students for a Democratic Society released the Port Huron Statement, a document that would basically kind of define the protest movements of the next 10 years. It is available online, and it is still an inspiring read about grappling with being an American in all of its best and worst aspects. Also in June, the Supreme Court ruled in Engel versus Vitale that mandatory prayer in school is unconstitutional. And as far as I know, Ron DeSantis has not been able to overturn that decision yet.
Not yet.
Yeah, we got about a 6-week window right now, or a runway between when we record and when it hits air. So I feel like we got about a 50-50 shot of that still being accurate when this hits.
On the same day was the decision in Manual Enterprises versus Day, when the Supreme Court decided that photographs of nude men are not obscene, which decriminalized nude male porn.
All right.
And not porn, like just, some frontal in your like serious 70s movie,
There you go.
And I just want to point out that Manuel Enterprises is spelled capital M, capital A, capital N, lowercase UEL. Men.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very good, Mike. Very good, Mike.
In case you weren't sure what they were doing there.
There you go.
Well, you sort of know what the target audience was there, right?
In July, Algeria became independent from France.
Yay!
Hip hip hooray.
Yay!
And later in the summer, both Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago got their freedom.
Yay!
We always like to celebrate that.
Yep.
One of the most famous stars in Hollywood history is dead at 36. Marilyn Monroe was found dead in bed under circumstances that were in tragic contrast to her glamorous career as a comic talent. On the surface, she seemed to have such a zest for life.
And on August 5th, as previously mentioned, Marilyn Monroe is found dead of a drug overdose, and people are still arguing about whether or not it was intentional.
Well, you know what? Here's what I say. Thumbs down to the Grim Reaper. That was a bad call, taking Marilyn from us. Do not care for that.
Yeah. Do we want to take a show position on the intentional question or not? We want to leave it mysterious.
No, because whatever you say, someone will yell at you online about it. So no, the show has no official stance on Marilyn's cause of
other than it just being a bad thing in general.
Just being a fucking bummer is what it was. Yes.
Yeah, agreed.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
But the big news in 62 in October was the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yep. Eventually, Soviet submarine Vasily Arkhipov refused to launch nuclear torpedoes. So that was a very big deal because he sort of got instructions and decided not to do that. Yeah. And if you don't like living in caves, that's a very big deal. Yeah. So thank you to the one guy who decided not to destroy humanity. Mm-hmm. There are lots of documentaries about the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a very tense situation that could have had very serious consequences. The best part is that we still have plenty of nukes, so we haven't given up the chance to do it all again.
Yay.
Great. Super smart of us.
Yep.
Some very important cultural things went down in 62. The Rolling Stones played their first show at London's Marquee Club.
Yay.
And the world has been infected by that invasive species ever since.
We will not have any anti-Rolling Stone slander on the program. I love the Stones. I especially honestly, I really like this early period where they were just playing a whole bunch of blues covers and just kind of nailing it. I really like this, 62, 63, those first few albums are great. They still play.
Also, the Beatles' Love Me Do came out, and the first James Bond film, Dr. No.
Yep. Good. All good things. Good culture. Yes, hooray.
I realize now the way I set that up, it felt like I was taking the Beatles' side in the war.
You
that
really
did. My purpose.
You really did. Yes. You had no harsh words.
1962 saw the publication of the novel versions of A Clockwork Orange and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. If you don't know, they eventually made movies out of both of those.
Yep.
If you'd like to hear about the movies, listen to our 1971 and 1975 episodes, respectively, where those very good movies got covered.
Plug.
The first Target store opened in 1962 in Roseville, Minnesota, and the first Walmart opened in Rogers, Arkansas.
Mike, are you a Target or a Walmart guy?
Target supposedly pays for their people to go to college.
All right, fair.
So, Target guy. Also, it's closer to my house.
Fair enough. Steven?
A Target.
Good, yes. Mike?
It's unanimous. Target.
Yay, Target wins. Big electoral victory for Target on the show today.
Batting 1,000.
Yep.
Some people were born that you've heard of.
Yep.
In 1962, Jim Carrey, Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yep. Okay.
I got one for you. Here you go. Axl Rose, Garth Brooks, John Bon Jovi, and Chuck Palahniuk.
Okay.
It's a nightmare blunt rotation.
Yeah, seriously.
The wordsmith himself, David Foster Wallace, Steve Irwin, Scott LaRock, Jackie Joyner Kersey, Taylor Dane. You remember Taylor Dane? I know you remember Taylor Dane, Jason Bailey.
Tell it to my heart. Tell me I'm the only one.
You're of the right age to remember Taylor Dane, and I know that because so am I. Jasmine Guy, Matthew Broderick, Rosie O'Donnell, MC Hammer.
Wow.
Yeah, 60 years old. Could probably still dance, I'm guessing.
Probably so.
Emilio Estevez, Master Chef Farron Adria, Gina Gershon, Ali Sheedy, Paula Abdul, 80s heartthrob Thomas Mapother IV. Have you ever heard of him?
I have not. What was he in?
He's better known as Tom Cruise.
Yes.
Right. Of course.
Yeah. I figured you might have heard of him.
Very
Bobcat
good.
Goldthwait, Jazzy Jeff, Steve Albini, Bo Jackson, Felicity Huffman, Ralph Fiennes, Elton Brown, Wesley Snipes, Patrick Ewing. A lot of people are 60 years old.
Yeah.
Right now. Michelle Yao having a stellar 60th.
Yeah. Yes.
Steve Carell, David Fincher, Baz Luhrmann, Joan Cusack, Bob Odenkirk, Carrie
Jeez.
Elwes, Demi Moore, Jodie Foster, and Mr. Jonathan Leibowitz, a.k.a. Jon Stewart.
Remember when Trump would always call him that? That wasn't weird.
Yeah.
That wasn't weird or anything. That wasn't.
No, had no purpose whatsoever.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I forgot about that when I
Yeah.
linked it with the Tom Cruise thing.
Yeah.
Now you made me look like an asshole. Okay. On March 2nd, Wilt Chamberlain scored 100 points on the New York Knicks.
Now I'm
Whoa.
not a sports guy, but that's a big deal. That was a big deal when that happened. I do know that was important when he scored 100 points. One player scored 100 points in a single game. Pretty big deal. He wasn't passing a lot though. I got to say, it doesn't sound like he was passing too much that game. Did they win that game or?
Yes.
Okay, good. I mean, maybe he scored a lot, but he didn't do any D. I don't know.
Carol Cox became the first woman driver at a National Hot Rod Association event.
All right.
She won the Super Stock class at the 1962 NHRA Winter Nationals.
Nice.
That was exciting.
Yeah.
I think they were afraid her ovaries were going to fly out of her ears driving that fast.
Yeah.
But it turned out that was all bullshit.
Yeah, pretty much.
And now that final combination, the left, the grazing right, and then a solid left. Around Sonny Liston, the 21st heavyweight champion of the world, jubilation. For Floyd Patterson, the former champion, consolation.
Sonny Liston knocked out Floyd Patterson in the first round to become world heavyweight champion. That was very exciting.
First round.
1962.
Shit.
First round. Yeah, people who paid for those tickets were annoyed.
Mad.
They barely got out of dinner and the thing was over. And finally, there was a World Cup in 1962. Pele added to his
Congratulations.
growing legend when Brazil defended their 1958 win by beating Czechoslovakia 3-1, becoming only the second country in history to go back-to-back. And other than sort of being non-political during that whole dictatorship time, it was great to add to Pele's
There you go.
record, and he was a beautiful man and good for Brazil. That's headlines.
All right. Thank you, Mike. All right. Stephen and Michael, you ready to do a top 5?
We are.
All right, great. So we're gonna, we had to do all sorts of new logistics in the pre-show. We're gonna when we have 2 guests, so we're gonna rotate, and we're just gonna kind of take these. These are just the 5 that you guys thought sort of most encapsulated what was happening and what was exciting about the year 1962. So Michael is going to start us off. And Michael, what is the first film in your 1962 top 5?
Our first film is Days of Wine and Roses.
Here is the star of Some Like It Hot and The Apartment, Jack Lemmon, to tell about his new role.
Hi. That on? Where they can hear me? Could be a disaster. You just saw some excerpts from several scenes in our new movie called Days of Wine and Roses.
It's very representational for the year because of the fact that it is an adaptation. Almost 85% of the movies made in Hollywood in 1962 were adaptations. There was
Oh, wow.
not a lot of original material at that time. Jack Lemmon, also known primarily as a comedy actor, he had scored great success, Mr. Roberts and Some Like It Hot and The Apartment, and he was plunging into a very deep drama.
How
Which was risky.
common was that? Yeah, how common was that at the time? Because now it's sort of part of the playbook when you're a comedy superstar.
Right, exactly. Because he had been typed basically, because even in his early films with like Judy Holliday in the early 50s
Right.
and all, they were all light romances, and it went from there. So that was very bold for him, and it was risky because he was switching gears. Lee Remick, his co-star. She had started in the late 50s, and she was a bright young starlet, and she was being groomed into full-blown stardom, and that was the setup. She also appeared earlier in the year from another Blake Edwards film. Do you know that one?
I don't. Which one is that?
Experiment in Terror,
my goodness,
another drama. Exactly.
Yeah.
So Mr. Edwards was very busy in 1962. He actually wrote 2 other movies.
Oh my God.
Didn't direct them in 62. And he was just coming off of his triumph with Breakfast at Tiffany's. So that's your setup. And the film plays out into the maelstrom where they are entrapped by alcoholism. It's a very heavy duty drama in the second half. Lots of despair and psychodrama going on,
Right.
but extremely well done, and with a resolution that really isn't one. It's sort of an open ending, kind of downbeat. Most other elements in it, great black and white cinematography. Why would you want to make a movie like this in color? You wouldn't.
Right.
And the black and white cinematography is also very representation of what was going on. The majority of movies made in 1962 were in black and white. People who went to the movies, they were mostly in a black and white world. So for all those reasons, Days of Wine and Roses is top 5.
All right. So Stephen, what then is our number 4 movie for 1962?
Okay, so now I'm going to talk about one of the foreign films that, as we had mentioned before, was really one of the things that made 1962 so exciting. So many of the great directors of the world, Kurosawa, Fellini, Antonioni, Bergman, De Sica, Buñuel, all working on major films in 1962. But the one that I'm going to talk about is by a younger, newer filmmaker, Francois Truffaut, and his masterpiece, Jules and Jim.
Qui c'est, Jules?
C'est moi.
Et vous?
Jim.
Jim et Jules alors?
Non, Jules et Jim.
Elle avait des bagues à chaque doigt, des tas de bracelets autour des poignets, et puis elle chantait avec une voix.
Attention, prêt. 1, 2, oh.
Elle avait des yeux d'opale qui me fascinaient. Il y avait l'ovale de son visage pâle, de femme fatale qui me fut fatale, de femme fatale qui me fut fatale.
Which I think has endured through the last 60 years as one of the great movies of that period. For one thing, it was sexually daring. And that, as Michael mentioned earlier, that was something that you saw in foreign films that you didn't see in too many Hollywood movies of that time, because it was really about a ménage à trois, 2 men in love with the same woman and sharing her sexually, actually, as the story turns out. In fact, the movie was considered so shocking that it was condemned by the Catholic Legion of Decency, which had a lot of impact at that time. Movies that got condemnations from the Catholic Legion. Catholic viewers were not supposed to go see them, but I think they did anyway in many cases. But it was,
and then other people knew which ones to go seek out.
Yes, absolutely, it worked on both levels. But it was a daring theme in that regard, but it was also an exciting piece of filmmaking. Truffaut was really experimenting with all the techniques of cinema. It was like this was actually his third feature film, and he had shown the same technical experimentation in the other two, 400 Blows and Shoot the Piano Player. But here it really came to fruition, and he just used all kinds of inventive cinema language to tell the story. It was both a romantic film and a very a melancholy film about the failures of love as well as the exhilaration of it. So it worked on many different levels. It's revived all the time. Still today, you can see it. I think it's considered one of the great foreign language films. And I should add that the performance of Jean Moreau as Catherine, the woman loved by the two men, is one of the seminal performances in all of international cinema, not just in 62. But she had been acting for a few years before that, but this was her signature role, I think, and the one that people always remember. She played a very complicated character, not completely sympathetic, but absolutely fascinating, enthralling throughout the movie. It really put her on the map as much as anything she had done. And she remained a screen siren and great actress, and became a film director as well. So it was crucial to for her and for audiences. And I might say, except for the final movie that we will be discussing, all four of the other movies that we have picked have very strong female roles. And that's maybe not typical of all the movies of 1962, but it shows what a varied year it was. It had, male-oriented movies, war movies, cowboy movies, but it also had a lot of great roles for actresses, and Jules and Jim is one of the peaks in that regard.
All right, so our third film, we're going to go back to Michael for the next one. Speaking of strong female leading characters, Michael, what is the third film in your top five?
All right, the third, number 3, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane?
Sister, sister, oh so fair, why is there blood all over your hair?
Whatever happened to Baby Jane? To seek the answer to that question, we will follow a man plotting a murder. Highly specialized work. But Robert Aldrich has considerable experience in such matters. He has a dozen successful pictures to his credit. His stars are Bette Davis and Joan Crawford.
Which was a potent example of what was really going on in Hollywood and its treatment of actresses, basically. Yeah. So you had two golden age superstars, Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. Both had been phenomenally successful. Joan Crawford in the 30s, primarily, that was her huge successful decade. Bette Davis in the late 30s and then throughout the 40s. And then they both hit a bump in the road in the 50s. And after All About Eve for Bette Davis, it was all downhill for the next decade. Joan had a little better luck in the 50s. She had some popular successes, but her run was over by the end of the 50s, and they were both in their 50s at that point in 1962, and they didn't know what to do because they were not being offered the kind of roles that they had flourished in, earlier in their careers. So along came this little property, Robert Aldrich, the macho filmmaker. One thing about this film is, aside from assigning these roles, this was a very unusual casting choice because these actresses had never done a film like this. Miss Davis had done villains in her, and then Crawford was always, her steely self. But now you have Crawford playing a victimized cripple because she's at the mercy of her sister, who is slowly descending into madness as you're watching the movie. And so it's this real psychological tug of war going on, and very dark. There's a lot of comic moments in the first half. So it's basically a black comedy. And then it shifts gears into a real psychological suspense thriller. So at the time, audiences were mesmerized by what was going on, and it was basically sold as a shocker and a mode of psycho. So, in the end, what is this film? Is it a camp classic? Because that's its reputation, which occurred through the years. Is it a psychological horror story? Is it a modern satire on Hollywood, much like Sunset Boulevard, which it resembles in tone and structure? So what is it? And the answer is all of the above.
Yes, indeed. All right, gentlemen. The next entry on your list you asked to do together. So what is the fourth of your top 5 of 1962?
Well, the next movie that we do was one of the biggest successes of 1962, and it was an adaptation of a tremendously successful novel, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Ladies and gentlemen, Gregory Peck.
The world never seems as fresh and wonderful, as comforting and terrifying, as good and evil, as it does when seen through the eyes of a child. For a writer to capture that feeling is remarkable, and perhaps that is why one book in the last few years has been so warmly embraced by tens of millions of people. To Kill a Mockingbird
by Harper Lee. And I think someone had just asked me, how do the film versions of classic novels compare? There's been a lot of writing about that, and many people think, they can never live up to the novel. This is a rare case where I think it was very faithful to the novel by Harper Lee, one of the most faithful adaptations I think that's ever been done. And so I think both the novel and the film have a life of their own and really are much loved by people all over the world, actually, both the novel and the film. And just to follow up on our theme of strong female characters, I mean, this was written by a female author. And so there weren't a lot of female filmmakers in 1962. There were a few, but this was a novel by a woman writer, and her main character really was her own surrogate, this young girl scout. And that's who we see the film through her eyes. It's her older adult version who narrates the movie. Kim Stanley does the narration. So it's really very much told from her point of view.
Yeah, and the film's reputation, of course, has been carried on through the years because of Gregory Peck in the role of Atticus Finch, the lawyer who defends a black man accused of raping a white woman, and that's the main heart of the film. But aside from that, the film is a tremendous evocation of childhood in films. I mean, that's the other part of that film, which most people, well, not most people, but some people, don't think about when they're watching it because they concentrate on on Peck
and the
courtroom drama going on, right, and the implications for the racial society at the point, because we're talking about the Deep South in the 1930s. But because it's set in the past, it still is reflecting what was going on in the early 60s with the burgeoning civil rights movement. So the movie's important as well in that regard.
I will only tell you before we move on that Mike and I also have a bit of a personal connection to Kill a Mockingbird, as we, Mike and I went to high school together, and we did in fact put up a stage production of To Kill a Mockingbird at our high school as well, in which we both appeared.
Great!
I played Atticus Finch.
Good for you.
And Mike played Sheriff Heck Tate, if I'm recalling correctly.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a great. It was a way to, because if you're going to do the play, you got to read the book.
Yep.
If you're going to read the book, you're going to watch the movie. And it was a real sort of dive into this idea that was interesting, because it's easy to sort of, when you're like growing up in the 80s and, high school in the early 90s and stuff, that this sort of concept is being formed that we had, like Rosa Parks didn't like moved from her seat, and then Martin Luther King gave a nice speech, and then like racism was just like, you know, bing bang boom, like good job. You know, sort of Ronald Reagan's 80s America wanted us to sort of feel like that was a fairly seamless transition. And this was the first sort of like real deep diving on that show. It was the first time that it was like, why isn't this obvious?
Right.
Like all the stuff he's saying seems like it ought to be obvious. It was a good entry point.
Yeah, great movie.
Great movie.
All right, so we've reached the peak of the mountain. And I will tell our listeners that, and you'll find this yourselves when you guys pick up Cinema 62, the greatest year at the movies. The format, which I really dig, is that, you know, it's told in several chapters that sort of organize the films of 62 over sort of broad thematic ideas. And there are several films covered in each chapter, but then the last chapter only covers one film. The title of the chapter is Crowning Achievement. So, Stephen, what is the crowning achievement? What is the last film on your top 5 for 1962?
So it's David Lean's epic film, Lawrence of Arabia.
He was a very great man.
He was a poet, a scholar, and a mighty warrior. He was also the most shameless exhibitionist since Barnum and Bailey.
What, in your opinion, do these people hope to gain from this war?
They hope to gain their freedom. There's one born every minute. They're going to get it, Mr. Bentley. I'm going to give it to them.
Lawrence and Arabia. Together, they made history.
Which won the Academy Award as Best Picture of the Year. 7 Oscars total. I should say, just in introducing it, I just went to see the movie again last week at the new Academy Museum Theater in Los Angeles, which is like a 1,000-seat theater. And it was not completely full, but I'd say there were 900 people of the 1,000 seats seeing this movie from 1962 on the big screen. It was a 70 millimeter print, looked fantastic, and the audience was totally with it. I mean, people forget, I mean, it's an adventure film, psychological study. It also has moments of humor, that's why it's great seeing movies with an audience, because they picked up on the humor, the ironies in the movie, and they also were swept up in the adventure, and a lot of applause at the end, of course. And so this was the first time I'd seen it on the big screen in about 10 years, since they had the 50th anniversary. This was close to the 60th already. But we were, as Michael had mentioned, most of the major movies of 62 were in black and white. This, of course, was an opposite extreme, an epic Technicolor widescreen movie. And as was pointed out at the Academy screening by someone who was talking about the composer of the film, Maurice Jarre, this film was done before there was CGI. There was no computer technology to enhance, to add people, in scenes where there were thousands of Arab tribesmen riding. There really were thousands of tribesmen. It was nothing was faked. I mean, they shot it on location in the desert, and it had a magnificent look to it that the sensual appeal of the movie was amazing. That's what an epic can do, is like immerse you into the locations where this story is taking place. But also the psychological depth of it was astonishing. Just creating a character at the center of the movie, played by Peter O'Toole, who is not a conventional hero. He does perform some amazingly heroic and courageous act during the course of the story. And it's based on true events, embellished, of course. But he also is a tortured person who is not just a pure hero like we had been seeing in a Cecil B. DeMille movie of the 50s.
Right.
That were epics where you didn't have the ambiguities that you got in this movie. So, I mean, I always describe it as being the best of both worlds in that it really captured the essence of what epic cinema should be. It was told on a grand scale, but it also had the psychological depth that you would find in great novels of the period that were taken very seriously. So you could enjoy it on more than one level. You could enjoy it as an adventure, and it certainly is compelling in that regard, but also going into what motivated this character, his lust for success, his lust to lose his British identity in the desert and become sort of an Arab himself, which was doomed to failure, and trying to unite the Arab tribes. Just the politics of the movie were very interesting and very timely. One of the points that we make in the book is that, one of the rationales for the Iraq War, which just not celebrated is not the right word, but its 20th anniversary, was that, this was going to bring all these warring factions together and form a democratic government in Iraq. That never happened. And if you watched this movie, you would see why it didn't happen, because there were all kinds of fierce tribal rivalries and conflicts. That the film works on so many levels, the political, the sociological, the psychological, the epic adventure level. I mean, you can really enjoy it from all of those perspectives. And that's why I think it stands out as the greatest movie of the year and one of the greatest movies of all time. I think that a lot of people would agree with that evaluation even today.
Right. Very much so. God, incredible movie. All right. You guys, thank you so much for this top 5. You've made a very compelling case that 62 was indeed the greatest year at movies. And now, a word from our sponsor.
This episode is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the globe.
From iconic directors to emerging auteurs, there is always something new to discover.
With Mubi, each and every film is hand-selected, so you can explore the best of cinema streaming anytime, anywhere.
And Mubi has several first-rate movies from 1962 streaming in the U.S., and we, of course, both gravitated towards the sexploitation movies from that year, streaming as part of the By NWR collection. Those are movies that are restored and presented by Drive director Nicholas Winding Refn. I checked out Satan in High Heels, which, I'm sorry, even if the movie stunk, is one of the all-time great titles. But it doesn't stink. It's this fantastic, first of all, New York movie, like, yay for me. This period in the the early 60s, some in the 50s as well, when they would shoot some New York movies on location because they were independent movies, they were exploitation movies, they were low budget things. This one has a lot of great photography of the sort of Midtown 57th 59th Street area, but also it's just this great story of this terrible, not terrible, she's fun, she's a femme fatale who steals a bunch of money from her recovering junkie husband. She's like dancing in the the burlesque show at the circus or whatever, and then she goes into Midtown New York and remakes herself as a nightclub chanteuse and gets in bad with a rich dude and his son. It's great. It's sleazy and a little dirty, but not like gross. I don't know. I really liked Satan in High Heels. Check that one out. Mike, what did you watch from 1962 streaming in the U.S.?
I very much enjoyed a movie called House on Bear Mountain, which is, what was the phrase you used? I think you said they called them nudie cuties.
It is a nudie cutie. It's very much a nudie cutie, yes.
It is basically an episode of the Benny Hill Show. I don't know if anybody remembers the Benny Hill Show, but I certainly do.
Of course.
Only made into a movie and with actually having the boobs out.
Sure.
There's literally jokes in the movie about how many showers the girls take who live in the house on Bear Mountain. So there's some little some jokey horror elements mixed in. There's a sort of a bootlegging subplot going on. It is a nudie cutie. It is a funny movie. It's a fun movie. It's light and easy to watch.
There we go. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at Mubi.com/a-very-good-year.
That's MUBI.com/a-very-good-year for a whole month of great cinema for free.
Free. So let's find out what films then were winning trophies and making money. Here's awards and box office.
Sell out with me, oh yeah, sell out with me tonight. The record company.
Oscar winner, as previously mentioned, Best Picture, Best Director to David Lean, and 5 others, Lawrence of Arabia.
A fine film, as we've mentioned. What else, Mike?
Yeah, well earned. Best Actor, Gregory, Peck, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yes,
yeah.
Well deserved, yes.
Yeah. Best Actress went to Anne Bancroft, and Best Supporting Actress to Patty Duke for The Miracle Worker.
Gentlemen, thoughts on The Miracle Worker?
Yes, it's an excellent film. Another adaptation. It actually started as a teleplay, and then
right.
Yeah, which most people don't realize that, and then it went to Broadway, and that's what it was adapted from. Again, this was considered not an A tier for the studios, and so they wanted bigger movie stars in this film. And when the producer and the directors refused, then he brought in the Broadway cast, almost intact. Like a couple of the supporting parts were changed, but what the leads, Bancroft and Duke were in. And yes, it's a again black and white, the glorious black and white. And
also 2 strong female characters,
yes,
there
exactly.
you go. There. So I mean, our theme, not that these were the only movies of the year, but it was another example of that. And it's based on a true story, of course, and very moving, very compelling. It was successful at the time. And I don't know if it's watched as much now as it has been, but it's a beautifully told story.
Yep.
How often do you see the actress and supporting actress coming out of the same movie? I feel like that's pretty cool. Best Supporting Actor went to Ed Begley. I'm assuming senior.
Yes.
For Sweet Bird of Youth.
Correct.
Yeah.
Sweet Bird of Youth. Yeah.
Great movie.
Yeah, it is. It is. He was a surprise winner. He was just as surprised as the audience was. That was an upset. The favorite was Omar Sharif going in, but it was Ed Begley. Actually, both Anne Bancroft and Patty Duke, they were upsets as well. So it was a big night for shockers at the Oscars in that year. So
imagine that.
Yes, surprise.
And Best Foreign Film. Can you imagine the pile this must have sat on top of? Sundays and Cybele. I mean, we've been talking about the foreign movies that came out this year this whole time, Yeah,
that's not a movie that's revived as much as some of the other films, but it really affected audiences at the time. It was a very touching story about a former soldier and a young girl who he tries to help, and then their relationship is misunderstood. It would be an interesting movie to revisit now in terms of the Me Too era, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Some other big award winners. The Golden Globe for Best Comedy went to That Touch of Mink.
Doris Day, Cary Grant. This was a huge smash hit. It made Miss Day the queen of the box office in 1962. She was the #1 top highest grossing, not that great a movie, however. That's the problem with That Touch of Mink.
Yeah, there weren't a lot of great comedies in 62, which is why That Touch of Mink won that award. And it doesn't hold up too well. So I would advise your listeners, choose some of the other 62 movies that you haven't seen. You could skip That Touch of Mink.
There you go.
Golden Globe for Best Musical went to The Music Man.
Another role that I played in high school. Sorry. Okay, I'm done reliving my high school drama glory days.
Were you Professor Harold Hill?
I was indeed Professor Harold Hill, yes.
What do you know about that? Did you sell clarinets to the kids in the town, coronets and the kids in the town?
I sure did, and I warned them about trouble with a capital T, which stands for P, which rhymes with pool, or however it works.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, absolutely. Robert Preston reprising the Broadway role that made him a major star.
Wonderfully entertaining movie. Still, it holds up beautifully.
Golden Globe for Best Actor, Comedy or Musical went to Marcello Mastroianni for Divorce Italian Style.
That was a big crossover international hit. Yeah,
right.
Correct.
And he was the first actor who was nominated for a foreign language role, the first male actor to ever get an Oscar nomination in a foreign language movie. He didn't win, but it was a tribute to his great work that he had done and his rising power as a star that he was nominated. And the movie also won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, which was also very unusual to have a foreign language movie win in the screenplay category then. So it was a real success on many levels.
Golden Globe for Best Actress, Comedy or Musical to Rosalind Russell for Gypsy.
All right, there's your other Broadway adaptation, big success.
Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress to Angela Lansbury for The Manchurian Candidate.
Now, see, this is one that I think we look back on now and think she should have won, even though the winner, Patty Duke, was very good. But Angela Lansbury's performance in The Manchurian Candidate
incredible
is one of the greatest performances of all time. Evil, yes, she's the villain of the piece, but great villains are often the most interesting characters in the movie, and she certainly was. I wish she had won, even though Patty Duke was very good. But
yeah, I agree. All right, Mike, let's bang through this domestic box office top 10.
Number 10, In Search of the Castaways.
Okay.
Walt Disney, of course, you guys didn't see that one, right?
I never saw it.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, I did. I was 12 in 1962.
Target audience.
Number 9 was a tie between Bon Voyage and The Interns.
I am not familiar with either of these motion pictures.
And I think I did see The Interns when it came out. It was strictly a programmer, basically.
Right.
But it had a lot of hot young actors in it, so people went to see it. Yeah, they forget those three. They weren't very good. Anyway.
Number 8, the well-mentioned Gypsy.
Yep.
Number 7, Hatari, with an exclamation point.
Yes.
All right.
You know I love to read the punctuation.
Howard Hawks, yes.
Howard
Yes.
Hawks.
John Wayne.
John Wayne,
Right.
and basically a Western set in Africa. So even
Right.
though it was about a safari and they were capturing animals for zoos and circuses, very unpolitically correct these days.
Yep.
But at least they weren't killing them. They weren't killing
But they weren't killing
There you
them.
go.
They were capturing them, right? And
Right. We'll
it's,
take the victories where we can.
Correct. Big hit, as you can see, box office success. And another great Henry Mancini score. That's where Baby Elephant Walk comes from.
There you go.
Number 6, To Kill a Mockingbird did well. Number 5, Mutiny on the Bounty.
So it was so for all intents and purposes, on the surface, it was a big hit, which it was, but because of its cost and expenses and everything, the turmoil that it caused, it was written off as a flop, and it's gone down in film history as a notorious money loser, which it was for the studio. So Marlon Brando, at the end of the first phase of his career, this was his last big commercial success. And it was overshadowed even among the critics that year by the original, 1935, with Clark Gable and Charles Laughton. So, but as you will read in the book, we do a lengthy discussion about why the film should be reevaluated.
It has its merits.
Yes,
it has its merits. Definitely.
Number 4, the not that great Touch of Mink. Right. That Touch of Mink.
Oh.
Number 3, The Music Man, not starring Jason Bailey, unfortunately. Number 2, well-deserved, Lawrence of Arabia. Bailey, we were one number away from having to bust out the hat trick sound effect.
I think we can use the hat trick sound effect with an asterisk. As the gentlemen note in the appendix to the book, this Lawrence of Arabia was number 2 at the time, but thanks to its subsequent re-releases, it in fact surpassed the number 1 film of the year. So yes, we
get
can
out the hat
we can
trick
drop
sound
out
effect.
the hat trick sound effect.
You are witnessing something quite spectacular. Complete the hat-trick! Crazy, just crazy. Remarkable hat-trick. Beautiful, just beautiful. Y'all ready for this?
That we have guests who have chosen the number 1 financial success of the year, the best picture of the year, and it's also on their top 5. But for asterisk purposes, what was at the time the number 1 movie of the year?
The Longest Day.
A big war action epic spectacular from producer Daryl Zanuck, am I correct?
Daryl Zanuck, he actually made it as an independent producer. He had been head of Fox since the 30s up to the 50s, and because of the changes going on, all the independent producers and actors and actresses, and anyway, so he decided to go out on his own in 1956. But he didn't have much success until he bought the rights to Cornelius Ryan's novel, The Longest Day, about the D-Day. And he had the ingenious idea of casting 42, count them, 42 international stars. You can line them up across the CinemaScope screen. and kind of course, if you blink sometimes, you would miss one or two. But
all right. Are you guys ready for a lightning round?
Sure.
All right, so we're gonna rotate. I'm just gonna call out a guest and a title, and we'll go from there. Mike, 5 minutes on the clock, please. And here we go. Steven, Lolita.
Pretty fucking good.
Well, Lolita's an outstanding movie. I mean, it was based on a novel that was considered to be unfilmable because it was about a middle-aged man and his infatuation and affair with a young teenage girl. And they couldn't quite capture everything that was in the novel, but they did capture the satirical humor, which is brilliant in the movie, and it gave a fantastic role to Peter Sellers, one of the movies that put him on the map as an up-and-coming comic genius. And I think if you can get past the uncomfortable nature of the story, it's a brilliant movie.
Michael, we had, in addition to Manchurian Candidate, 2 more John Frankenheimer movies in 1962, All Fall Down and Birdman of Alcatraz.
Well, All Fall Down is the first film that was released in the year, and that stars Angela Lansbury, and that gave him the idea to cast her in the Manchurian Candidate. So that it's notable film history right from the start. Also starring Carl Malden and Warren Beatty and Eva Marie Saint. It's a family drama. Written by based on a play by William Ing.
Novel.
Stephen
Hurley.
Novel. Yeah,
James
it was novel.
Hurley.
Right.
He wrote Midnight Cowboy later.
Correct. Right. So it's a good little movie.
It's a great little film.
I would strongly recommend it. Oh, and the other one, Birdman of Alcatraz.
Fantastic.
Burt Lancaster, a terrific performance by him. It's basically a biopic about a criminal incarcerated in the teens until his death in the 60s. So he was behind bars for over 50, almost 50 years. A very compelling film, actually. Cast against type, playing his very possessive mother, Thelma Ritter, usually known for for comedic and sympathetic roles. Not very sympathetic in this part. And both of them were nominated for Oscars that year. And again, black and white, glorious black and white.
There you go. Stephen, another very busy young auteur in 1962 was Sidney Lumet, who put out both Long Day's Journey into Night and A View from the Bridge.
Right. So those were both theatrical adaptations, both very well done. especially Long Day's Journey into Night. That's another outstanding film of 1962 that, the list just goes on and on. But I mean, it was just a 4-character piece based on the play by Eugene O'Neill, disturbing family drama about a very dysfunctional, troubled family. Katharine Hepburn doing one of her greatest performances. She considered it the best role that she ever played on screen. And she plays the mother of this family who's a drug addict, which was not conventional movie material at the time. And the other actors, Ralph Richardson as the father, Jason Robards as the older brother, Dean Stockwell as the younger brother, all terrific performances. And even though it's basically the play, it doesn't seem stage bound. It's done in a very inventive way so that it's cinematic while it remains very true to the material.
Michael, Sam Peckinpah's Ride the High Country.
Very good film.
Oh, Ride the High Country. That would have been in the top 5. And one thing I have to insert here is that it was actually hard to come up with 5 because you could pick 15 movies or 20 movies out of 1962 and talk about them. So it's a sort of a prologue to the Wild Bunch at the end of the decade. And frankly, I think Steve and I both think it's a superior movie to the Wild Bunch. That may be,
I mean, both are very good, but this Ride to High Country is almost a perfect movie, I think.
And finally, Stephen, another Western, John Ford's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance.
Well, this had some of the same themes as Ride the High Country about the dying of the West, the changing of it, and the myths that were perpetuated to keep the idea of the West alive. And this is a landmark movie also, old-fashioned, more so than the Peckinpah movie. It was mostly shot on studio sets rather than on location, but John Wayne, James Stewart, both excellent in the film. And it has some ironic twists to it that John Ford was questioning some of the straightforward myths of the West that he had perpetuated in his earlier Westerns, going back to Stagecoach. This was a more ironical and kind of somewhat melancholy Western that stays with you. And again, I don't know if it was appreciated fully at the time. It's another movie whose reputation has grown over the years, and it's now considered one of the greatest movies of 1962. And it, didn't get that kind of acclaim when it came out. So some of the movies did get the acclaim, and some of them did deserve it. Some of them, like That Touch of Mink, did not deserve it. And then there were movies that did not get the acclaim that are now much more appreciated and endorsed.
All right. That concludes our lightning round. And now we're going to throw it to our friend W. Axel Foley for a quick PSA.
Head on over to your favorite podcasting app. Give us a star, a rate, a review. Give us a written review and tell us that you love us, because that's what lets people know that we're here.
All right, gentlemen, once again, the book is entitled Cinema 62, The Greatest Year at the Movies. It is a wonderful read. It's entertaining. The prose is snappy and smart. And, like all the great film books, anyone who reads it will come away with a big, long list of movies they got to track down and watch.
The movies are so good. Yes.
But it's a really wonderful book, and people can pick it up wherever fine books are sold. And then do you guys have any other events coming up? Any of your screening events?
Yeah, we're actually working on a couple of things right now with the revival of the Anniversary Classic series, which had been, sort of went into deep freeze, of course, during the pandemic. Sure. And now we emerged out of it last year and finally getting in. I may, if I may, interject a little ad here.
Absolutely.
So for your listeners, I would encourage you, if you're so inclined, to pick up the book. I can give you a little discount advice. If you go directly to our publisher, Rutgers University Press, go to the Cinema 62 page and put in this promo code. Ready?
Hey.
R Cinema 62. Just the number 62. Don't spell it out. That's R Cinema 62. And it'll be direct to the publisher, no middleman, no Amazon, blah blah. And you're going to get free shipping and 30% off. It's a good deal.
Hey. All right. We will put that same link direct to that page and with the discount code on our social media when we put the episode out, and also on our webpage. I am Fun City Cinema on Instagram, Jason-Bailey on Twitter and Letterboxd, where you'll also find under my list vertical the top 5 lists for every guest of every show to date. Mike, where can people find you?
I am Brainwashed Lib on Twitter.
And Mike, before we go, what is your favorite movie of 1962?
My favorite movie of 1962 is called La Jetée. It is a French film.
Short film, right?
La Jetée is like a surrealist, apocalyptic film. It's got all these sort of surrealist elements that feel very, 20s, 30s, but it's post-apocalyptic Paris after World War III. It's just a wild ass movie, and there's only actually one thing in it that was shot on a movie camera. Everything else is stills.
Amazing.
But the way it's edited, the music, the sound, the narration, to me, it holds together as a film. I wouldn't mention it if it was a photo book. It's really something that I think is really just creative and inventive and really is a sort of perfect hinge point between the eras. How about you?
My favorite of 62, we mentioned it before, is The Manchurian Candidate. I just feel like it's such a tightly wound little clock, and everything in it is so precise. And it's such an interesting, again, the idea of hinge points, like it's, this television director, and it's a media satire in a lot of ways. It's a political satire in some ways. It's really a merciless take on of McCarthyism, pretty close to when it happened, which is pretty ballsy. The political thriller, the suspense aspects of it are just tight as a drum. Every performance in it is so good. Sinatra fucking crushes it in this movie. And also it's the source of one of my favorite pieces of film criticism, which is Greil Marcus's book for the BFI Film Classic series about Manchurian Candidate, is just one of my favorite little short books of film criticism that I've ever read. So that's my particular pick.
Yeah, if you haven't seen the original, like give yourself the like pleasure of a Sunday and like dig in. Yeah.
All right.
Good stuff.
Thank you again so much, Stephen and Michael, for taking the time to come on and talk to us.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun. Really great conversation.
Yeah,
Thank
and the
you
time
so
flew by. What happened to the time? It did. It was like, wow, it's over already. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jason.
And thank you for listening.
It was a very good year.